Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the second day of the Freedom Games. I'm very happy to welcome everyone who has arrived to the Hall of Machines. We are starting with a very strong point. We will be looking at the map of Europe, the last map of Europe. This is the title of the first panel, which is held in memory of Bronisław Geremek, a historian, political scientist, a humanity professor, an MP, the chair of the Freedom Union. So Katarzyna Skrzydłowska, Kalukin, who is the social journalist and reporter, will be the moderator, and she will have great guests. Adam Michnik, who is editor-in-chief of Gazeta Wyborcza. Let's give him a round of applause. And remotely, we will be speaking to a French sociologist, Mink. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome Adam Michnik, the editor-in-chief of Gazeta Wyborcza, and Professor Mink, who specializes in the topics of the Central Europe. He's a sociologist. He will be connecting from France. My name is Katarzyna Skrzydłowska Kalukin. I represent Krytyka Liberalna. I'm a social journalist and reporter. So I would like to ask about the following things. The Central Eastern Europe, throughout its history, was a subject, not the actor of events. After the aggression, Russian aggression against Ukraine, and now we have a voice, we are listened to, but will it last? This change which is taking place now, does it provide us an opportunity of regaining European identity, or maybe a different type of identity? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a double honor for me, because this is the meeting dedicated to the memory of Bronisław Geremek, who was my friend. He was the man. There was a great man. He was really very special for Poland. And the Freedom Games are an important event in the Polish spiritual, civic, and mind-related life. The moderator has asked me about our region. So I think we should start by asking whether can we imagine the future of Europe without this region, or at least maybe I'll be provocative by saying without these two entities of today's war in the East, without the victim of the Putin's aggression, without Ukraine, and without the aggressor, without Russia. We can imagine it easily without Putin, but without Russia, it's hard to imagine a European culture. We cannot exclude the Russian culture. When I'm looking from the Polish perspective, so I can imagine, I try to imagine how Professor Geremek would perceive it. So I'm looking at Poland as a country of a specific paradox. When we look at the foreign policy, the Polish government's position is reasonable. It's unanimously supported Ukraine. But at the same time, the foreign policy has its other face, quite brutal. It's even aberrative. So the aggression of the Polish foreign policy against Brussels, Germany, EU member states. This is the policy of distracting the EU via alliances, extreme right and nationalist parties, which are against European values. So when we look at the domestic internal policy. We can be under the impression that the regime led by Jarosław Kaczyński is the regime that implements Putin's policy, Putin's model of state and society. So this model implemented by Putin, Kaczyński, Morawiecki and Ziobro. So the model this model is tried to be introduced in Poland to liquidate free media, independent courts. There is aggression against the West European values. So they are using the rhetorics which states that they are against LGBT movements, women's rights. So it damages the rules of democracy, the order of democracy in Europe. Europe is not just a geographic term. It's also an ideological and political term and cultural term. So you can be a European and you can live in Brazil or Argentina or in Egypt. You can also be an enemy of European values. You can live in Warsaw, in Paris, just like Marine Le Pen, Vox party in Spain, or even in Italy, like Salvini, or the victors of the latest election, parliamentary election. So, when answering your question, what will be the relation of the international public opinion towards our region? I must say that it will mainly depend on the type of ruling of our government. I do hope that now these are the last months or even weeks. Hopefully, these will be weeks that the Law and Justice Party will rule, and we will close this absurd policy of being against Germans, Brussels, the French, independent judges, physicians who protest, teachers who protest. So there are the two key themes in this Putin's policy. It's Putinism in Poland on the one hand. So on the one hand, they are giving money away, and at the same time, they are resigning from the reforms, social reforms that are needed. So they are infiltrating hatred. They are building the image of enemies. And the last thesis, Catholicism, real true Poles are Catholics, so this is really making fools of people. So this is what happened in Russia. Putin told some Russians that Russia is the object of aggression by the NATO, European Union, the United States. So it's against the model of the open and tolerant state, and Putin himself calls himself as a defender of the traditional and conservative values in Europe. And he loves being perceived as someone who defends Christian values from the rotten Europe. I can only repeat after Gałczyński, please help me, God, to be away from the friends who are not friends. So we know that before Russia wanted to be a part of European community, and the same about Poland, and now they are against. So, Professor, the floor is yours. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy that we are meeting here in memory of Bronisław Geremek. This memory is very important to all of us. He was a great politician and mindset, and the things Bronisław Geremek was saying and his inheritance provide very important messages. For example, he was saying that when Poland becomes NATO state, he didn't only say it was about security, but also about common values. And I do agree with Adam. This is of key importance. When we are looking at the borders, the border is the democracy is the border. There is no geographic terms that are as strong as the term of terms based on values. So I think this is worth considering. But I am slightly against what Mr. Michnik has said. He was saying whether the Central Europe is a term, or Europe can be perceived as a political or geographic term. Mr. Michnik said it's rather political in nature. In my opinion, it is geographic. Politics is changing. That's its nature. So when we look at the Central Europe, it's a semantic invention, because if we observe its history, in the Central Europe there are different nations, different traditions, different resources of memory that are used by the states. And it leads us to the situation that now not all Central European countries behave in the same way in the face of the Russian aggression. When you are asking me whether the opinion on Poland will change, because we really are talking about Poland, not about the Central Europe. When we study the current status of Europe, the Europe stopped being the West and the East. During the Cold War, we had such division. Now it's a system of combined vessels. So, of course, there are some bad things coming from the West. They shouldn't be absolutized. The West should not be perceived as an ideal state. Even nowadays, in Italy or in Spain, we don't know what we will have to deal with, and maybe we will discover that the history will repeat and Poland will not be perceived so badly, because there are democratic forces in Poland, forces meaning that they are able to gain the authority government. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. So it sounds that this geographic and political community is in Europe. So I wanted to ask you, so do you think there is an opportunity that Europe will have the common identity, because now it looks impossible, and whether Europe can play a role not only in terms of being perceived by the Western Europe, but whether it will impact the change in the Western Europe? The role of Poland, yes? Well, it's very hard to answer this question because it's a question through a prophet. Professor Mink is a sociologist and historian. We are not prophets. So it's very hard to answer this question. Basically, we need to ask what Polish people are able to do with Poland, whether they can push Poland into a different track, whether they will stop being Poland will stop being perceived as anti-European. This Catholic nationalist philosophy will stop prevailing. So it's a very different mixture where the Catholic Church is perceived as the church expressed through the language of Radio Maria, not the language of Father Tischner. So we all the time hear about hostility against women's rights, the women who want to have the rights respected. Or also they are talking about refugees. It's a paradox when we look at the Polish-Ukrainian border. The world is admiring the attitude of Poles. They are wonderful. They are better than it could have been expected. When we look at the border between Poland and Belarus, we can see this barbarism of Poles who allow refugees to die in mud of hypothermia. Pregnant women are trying to go through the barbed wires to reach Poland, and then the border guards who are guarding the border, they are receiving medals and diplomas. So it's the genius of Kaczynski in a way. Kaczynski can get what is the worst in people and tell them that this is the best, that they are cruel, they have no conscience, they are destroying innocent people, and he's telling the people that it's a virtue, it's their patriotism. So from this perspective, we have to agree that Putin infected the world with something horrible. Nationalism, imperial nationalism is used by Putin. It's at the same time a poison injected into all the spheres of life. And there are volunteers who receive this poison, and we have known about it from the times of Donald Trump when he was the president of the United States. There was this dramatic event where a participant of a protest was murdered. She was for racial equality, and then Trump said that the good people were there to help. So it's the same situation we are observing right now behind our eastern border. All the time we can hear some Putin's arguments. We do not believe in them, of course, in Poland, but in Russia, many people believed in them. So why Putin bombs the cities on the borders? And he says, why are they defending? If they didn't defend themselves, there would be no victims. They should surrender. So this is the logic we should never learn and use, although our government is trying to impose it on us when we observe how independent judges are treated in Poland. This is a model, a standard. We have seen this latest spectacular imprisonment of Professor Witecki. Fortunately, he left the jail. He was released, but in Russia, when people are imprisoned, some outstanding activists, Chodorkowski, and so on and so forth, there were signals that you will either do what we tell you to do, you kneel in front of the government, or we will destroy you. So this is this type of signals that we have to be very careful about, and we have to be very concerned, because this may be a route to kill democracy in Poland, as it happened in Russia. We can say that what is happening in Russia right now, we can see a big Tiananmen Square in the map. In that square, the Chinese aspiration to liberty were murdered. Now, Putin is trying to kill Ukrainian wishes to be free.
Similar events like at the embassy is like the meeting of hatred of those who don't want to go to the war in the name of Putin's craze, and they escape from Russia. They are stigmatized, they are offended, and disregarded. That's the worst Polish tradition. The phenomenon of what is happening is that Putin revives our worst features. Answering Katarzyna's question, whether we are going to change Europe, the answer is not easy. But 3 times in the 20th century, such changes happened. The first one was October 1956. The second time was Gdańsk shipyard in the 1980, and the third time was in 1989 when communists lost the election. They accepted this result and they handed over the power. But the question is, are we able to change ourselves? If we do, by the very fact of our inner change, will change the entire continent. How is it affected by our attitude to Russia and to Russians? Professor. It's really difficult to talk after Adam's speech because we represent the same generation and we've got similar experience. Well, it's hard not to agree with him, because everything he said is nothing but the truth. We are not prophets, although Adam has been several times, and it was quite good. What actually happened is not full confessionalization, but something more. But these are the details only. If you were looking for a prophet, that's Adam. I'm not a prophet. The question is about the hope, where the hope for Poland lies. We must not forget the European Union. What has happened since Putin struck, or actually since 2014, when Putin attacked Ukraine, it turned out that the European Union stands together. Secondly, that it stands together around specific values, and consequently, it strikes back against Russia's aggression and nationalism. It's also very important for Poland because the European Union is like the guardian of these values. It's a fantastic tool to make Poland more superior to subordinate to these values. Putin's ideas has spread all over the world, but it all starts with cynicism. That's how we can describe the beginnings of Jarosław Kaczyński. If such people believe in some facts, they become true through consequences. I think that any kind of rational approach in people like Kaczyński that would allow for coming back to values is not possible. So it simply means fighting with authoritarian regimes which exist now and existed in the past. I would like to say that much depends on the political culture in Poland, on the education and mobilization of young people, as well as the consent inside the opposition. It's not about possessions or distribution of roles, but it's about values, and we have to stand united. All right, I would like to ask the following question. On the one hand, as I said, Poland or Polish experience after Russia's aggression on Ukraine opened the eyes of Europe. But secondly, there is a vivid debate on the attitude towards Russians. It started after the aggression started, whether we should remove writers and creators, but now it's quite rational because there are some public attacks on Russians in Poland. Can Poland and Europe contribute to a certain change in Russia? It seems to me that you're absolutely right in what you're saying about the absurd, reactive, dumb, nationalistic approach to these Russians who don't want to serve Putin. They are natural allies of freedom all over the world. Their stigmatizing and discrimination is both non-humanitarian and stupid. But I would challenge one thing you said. It was not Poland that opened the Western's eyes to Russia. Putin opened the Western eyes. The invasion on Ukraine was against the logic of the Western mindset. It was like the concept of we do business, we help you, we invest, we offer loans, technologies, and it serves very well. Don't destroy it. Nobody believed that Putin would attack Kiev. Everybody expected Lugansk, Donbass, but bombarding Kiev, it seemed irrational and impossible, and that was a mistake. So it was Putin who opened the eyes of the West to Russia and to Ukraine. Before the war, many hadn't known what Ukraine was. Kiev, Russian city, Odessa, Kharkiv. They knew it only from literature, from stories. Therefore, I think that Putin's merits are huge for opening Europe's eyes and change the approach of some leftist communities that had anti-American dogma. What happened changed a lot in the approach of Western social democrats, but the same is true for Poland. It seems that the approach of the leftist milieus are more sensible and rational than ever before. And the last point I would like to make is about the plague, which is not only Polish, Eastern European, but we also mentioned Spain. Professor Mink is right that memory resources differ, but every European country has its historical burden. At a certain point in time, following reinterpretation, it can become the tool for building a totalitarian country. The English have had it since Cromwell, the French since Jacobean times, the Germans, the Spanish do have it as well. Everybody has it. The question, therefore, is to what extent what is of animal-like nature in us can be criticized by the culture-based nature of ours. To what extent can we fight our bad tradition? That's what we all have. The United States is the country that used to fight with Hitler, with Stalin during the Cold War, but there was also racism in these countries. It was like illegal apartheid. Obama, in an interview, said that 40 years ago, he could be in a hotel as the one who brings luggage to a white tourist. So that's the question about hope that Katarzyna asks. The answer I would give is as follows. It's never so bad that it couldn't be worse, and it's never so good that it couldn't be better. There is no situation in which we can say there is no hope for our planet. There is always hope. But the question is whether the moment in which we believe there is no hope means burying the hope inside us. We have to be aware of too high optimism and think that we live in the best of the worlds. But we also have to remember that since there is Marine Le Pen and Vox in Spain and Salvini in Italy, as well as Meloni, Kaczynski, Orban, and the president of Russia, if we accept that we cannot affect anything, it means we give up this opportunity, we give up the hope. But what European tradition teaches us is that in no point in time we cannot say there is no hope. When the situation was hopeless, a French lieutenant refused to work for the government, signing capitulation with the Reich, and then he took over in France, and it was the goal. We have to build these traditions. We have to build it here, in our side. How to build it and what results from the general conversation, it's a separate and very complex topic. There are regional, generation, social differences. We have to decompose it into essential components, but generally we must not reject the belief and the trust that the future depends on us. I will never reject such knowledge and such approach. I have lived quite a long time. After 1968, there were moments when everybody believed everything was lost, that everything went to vain. And in December, there was a rebellion, just like during the martial law. We had the army surrounding our country, but it turns out that history likes playing tricks. What trick is going to play now? I don't know. But I think that in no time will we see that Putin's not here and that he was not such a monster, that he was just a rogue from Leningrad and pretended to be stronger than he really was. That we've got liberal democracy in Poland, right? Professor, over to you. I like decomposing things, but I still believe, just like Adam, that there is hope. And just like him, there were moments when we were happy and celebrating the victory. But victory is quite subjective. As far as memory resources are concerned, the issue is more complex. Once we analyze the case of Spain, we can see that a new socialist generation can trigger war. They built the rhetorics of coming back to 1936, 1939, because these were the forgotten victims of what Franco did. Consequently, the society is divided and it paves the way for new politicians to enter. Some understood that cynicism pays, and sometimes they believe in anti-values against those that Adam has just mentioned. The second aspect is related to Russia. There is going to be a problem with Russia, but in order to understand it, we need to remember that since the beginning of noughties, there was military and nationalistic propaganda. So the society didn't have another source of knowledge apart from dissidents who had access to different literature, to different media, and who traveled. Although there were many oligarch rogues among those who traveled. Putin's end will not be happy whether it's going to be Nuremberg or hanging, but Russia and Russian society will remain. Hence the question, what remedy should be developed to offset the depth of the propaganda? The people believe in Putin's word, and it blurs the reality. Just a short question, but perhaps I take the opportunity from the audience. Is anybody willing to ask a question? Thank you, Ignacy Niemczycki from Geremek's Foundation. It's going to be a question and a short comment on what we have just heard. You asked about the attitude to Russia. I remember what Bronisław Geremek used to say, that human rights are played now not only in the public space but also in the private space. Inside us there is the fight whether we should observe human rights or not. And I suppose Marta Lempart, who you referred to, failed this inner battle. And the question, Geremek said there wouldn't be common Europe without common European identity. I'm wondering whether we are on the right way to build the common European identity. Isn't it so that this is not our region, the V4 Poland or the West, build the identity? Isn't it so that Ukrainian citizens with their attitude build the European identity and unity? Thank you.
I think it's a good direction. But I would add something. Whether are we able to build common Polish identity in the sense that we will have the elementary basis, something which is common to all of us. I come from Silesia, and I know that historical awareness in Silesia is completely different than the awareness in Warsaw. So the question is whether we are able to do it. Now this process takes place by activating local communities, local governments. So there is a direction, a way taken by the Ukrainian committee, the way which leads to the European community. So it will be a type of Gleischaft. So there will always be a diversity, which will be an asset in Europe. We are different from Italians, for instance, or the Spanish or Norwegians. It's not a disadvantage, because these differences enrich our society. We are aware that we need some balance between what is local and what is universal. So you find out how a dessert tastes once you try it. So we have to try and taste it. This is the tendency. I think that Professor Geremek was for such arguments. He used to say after Schuman that Jean Monnet, he was saying that we created Europe. He didn't mean that we had to create a new European nation. Kaczyński was saying that Professor Geremek was an idiot. Professor knew very well where he lived. And he was very much rooted in the Polish tradition. And also in the European tradition. When he was speaking with French people, he was like a partner to the dialogue about France. So, when he was in the Sorbonne, Kaczyński was saying that Geremek was refusing to speak in French universities because he was not French. It's a nonsense. It's a lie. We have to know how to look through the international perspective. Two examples. Daniel Beauvoir. What did he say about Poland, different periods of Polish history or relations between Poland and Ukraine? And secondly, Norman Davies. So we need to look at ourselves through someone else's eyes, through German, Jewish, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Belarusian or Czech eyes. This will allow us to know better who we are. It will provide us it will help us to identify our identity as Europeans. Thank you very much. The time is up, but I would like to ask Professor to summarize. Yes, I would like to add a comment to what Adam has said. It's the double-sided impact. I will always remember how important for intellectuals, Western intellectuals and public opinion were the text of the dissidents and the democratic opposition in the Central Europe and also in Russia, because Solzhenitsyn really interfered with this Russophobia wall present in France. Secondly, I would like to say that the current inspiration to rebuild the European identity is provided by Ukraine. I do agree with this question mark in your question. I am certain, I'm positive that what we see and hear from Ukrainians, the president of Ukraine, who synthesizes very well. This is very important to the European identity. And it is food for thought for all politicians and sometimes to change their positions, because when I observe French extreme left wing, I think they are on the margin. Even in the extreme left wing, people disagree with such statements. So I think it's kind of a breakthrough, and we will witness it for longer. Thank you very much. Thank you to Adam Michnik and Professor George Mink. Thank you to the audience. I think it was a very interesting discussion.